Everyone longs for love. Everyone yearns to belong. But at what cost? Lisa Hale had spent most of her life on her parents' modest ranch in the outskirts of Rosehill, a small town tucked away between the hills of Connecticut. Her days were simple: tending the chickens, helping her mother prepare preserves, scrubbing floors until they gleamed, and hanging linens that smelled of lavender and sunlight. Life wasn't glamorous, but it was familiar. Every summer, the Thompson family would come from the city to vacation on the ranch, a wealthy dynasty that made its fortune in technology. Their arrival always meant fresh paint on the fences, new curtains, and a nervous flutter in Lisa's stomach that had nothing to do with the chores. Because among the Thompsons was him, Eric. Eric Thompson, the heir. Golden-haired, sharp-jawed, and as cold as the winter lakes. Lisa had loved him in secret since she was 15. Not the childish kind of love, but that silent, aching affection that builds itself into the soul. Her mother noticed, of course. Mothers always do. And she feared the worst. "Don't let those city boys break your heart, Lisa," she'd say, folding the laundry with eyes that had seen too many young girls learn too late. But Lisa dreamed. She dreamed quietly, watching from the windows when Eric arrived in his black Mercedes, laughing too loudly, wearing expensive watches and disinterest like armor. That summer, the summer of 2019, something changed. Eric brought along a friend, Steve Blackwell. Steve was everything Eric wasn't. Kind-eyed, soft-spoken, with an empathetic way of listening that made even silence feel safe. The two were opposites, oil and water, but inseparable. They joked together, hunted, drank whiskey by the bonfire, but their souls were made of different things. Lisa's affection for Eric didn't go unnoticed, and when he noticed, he didn't respond with kindness or curiosity. He responded with cruelty. One lazy afternoon, as cicadas hummed and the sun bathed the porch in gold, Eric turned to his sister Olivia and made a bet. "If I can make that farm girl fall head over heels for me by the end of summer," he said, smirking, "you'll let me drive the Porsche." Olivia laughed. "She already has," she answered, rolling her eyes. "But sure. Let's see if you can keep up the act." The bet was sealed with a laugh and a sip of bourbon. That night, Lisa was scrubbing dishes in the kitchen after dinner when Eric appeared. He leaned against the counter, eyes thoughtful, and began speaking about impossible loves, about people from different worlds, about how fate sometimes brings together two souls meant to be apart. Behind the kitchen door, Olivia listened, amused. For Lisa, it felt like a page torn from a novel. For Eric, it was just part of the game. Days passed, then weeks, and Eric played his role well. He brought her wildflowers, read poetry he pretended to like, and asked questions that made Lisa feel seen, like she mattered. She began to fall. Deeper. Harder. Her mother grew quiet. There were nights Lisa would stay up, watching the moonlight filter through the curtains, clutching a ribbon he'd once tied in her hair. And when, one morning, she found herself dizzy, nauseous, and unable to keep food down, it wasn't love she feared. It was the truth. She was pregnant. Her mother wept silently. Eric's parents demanded a wedding. The Hales, humiliated but resigned, agreed. Lisa said yes with her heart full of hope. She thought it was fate, destiny. She didn't know it was a consequence, a punishment for trusting a love that was never real. Eric was devastated, not by the pregnancy, but by the trap he'd built for himself. Marriage was not in his plans. He wanted the Porsche, not a bride. And yet there he was, exchanging vows in the family garden with Lisa Hale, who wore a borrowed white dress and a smile that reached the heavens. Steve, standing beside Eric as his best man, watched everything unfold with unease. He had witnessed the callousness with which Eric treated her, how he rolled his eyes when Lisa spoke, how he forgot small things, her favorite flower, her birthday, the color she loved. Lisa didn't notice, or maybe she chose not to. Love does that. It forgives what it shouldn't. Steve's heart clenched each time she smiled at Eric and received only silence in return. He hated how much he noticed, hated that he cared, but he did, and more than he was ready to admit. On their wedding night, Lisa waited for hours in a candlelit bedroom. Eric didn't come. He was at a bar in New Haven with friends, laughing over shots and pretending he hadn't just ruined someone's life. Lisa cried herself to sleep. Steve drove home alone, guilt gnawing at him like an old wound. He should have stopped the wedding. He should have said something. But who was he to interfere? She was Eric's wife now. And yet, as he looked at her from across the room, with her soft voice and eyes full of dreams, Steve felt something stir. Something dangerous. Something tender. And though he didn't name it, it was already too late. Because sometimes, the heart knows long before the mind admits it. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel, leave a like, and tell us what kind of romantic story you'd love to see next. What Lisa couldn't possibly imagine was that the man she had just married cried alone that night. But not out of love. Eric didn't cry for her, nor for the family they were supposedly starting. He cried for himself, for the weight of the lie he could no longer control. He never wanted a child, never wanted a wife. He wanted a thrill, a win, a Porsche. Now he was shackled to a girl from the countryside who mistook affection for love, sweetness for commitment. Each day he drifted further away. First he came home late. Then he stopped coming home entirely. Lisa excused it all. He was stressed, confused, adjusting. But what he really was indifferent. And indifference, she would soon learn, is colder than cruelty. The pregnancy was a lonely road. Lisa read every book she could find, prepared the nursery with her mother's help, and hoped that when he held their baby, something would shift inside him. But hope does not plant roots in hardened soil. It withers. Meanwhile, Steve stepped in. He brought groceries, drove her to doctor's appointments, and painted the nursery when Eric forgot. He never crossed the line, but his presence became indispensable. Not out of pity. No, what Steve felt was deeper. Every time Eric mocked Lisa or dismissed her softly spoken ideas, Steve burned with anger he couldn't voice. And in that fire something else was born. Not pity, not duty, but love. A quiet, impossible love that grew in shadows. When Charlotte was born, Eric was nowhere to be found. Steve rushed Lisa to the hospital, held her hand through the contractions, and was the first to see the baby take her first breath. He cried. Not because she was his, but because he knew what it meant to be there, really be there. Hours later, Eric appeared, reeking of whiskey and arrogance. "She has your eyes," he mumbled, and walked out of the room. Lisa clung to the scraps of that sentence, desperate to believe there was still a version of the man she once loved buried under the ice. Steve. Steve stood in the corner, heart aching, realizing something terrible and true. Eric would never love her, and she deserved to be loved. After the wedding, Lisa moved into the Thompson mansion. It was never a home. Olivia sneered at her across dinner tables. The maids whispered when she passed. Eric's father greeted her with cold formality. Lisa became a ghost in a house that once enchanted her. She cleaned, cooked, cared for Charlotte, and smiled through the pain. Steve, who had now joined the family company, began to change, or so it seemed. He came home later each day, reeking of perfume, sometimes lipstick smudged on his collar. Lisa noticed, pretended she didn't. But each time something inside her cracked. Not from jealousy, or maybe that was exactly it. Not the romantic kind, but the kind that comes when the one person who made you feel seen starts looking elsewhere. Steve had started dating Brooke Silverstone, a beautiful, vibrant woman he'd known in college. Brooke had dreams, a contagious laugh, and made grand plans for their future. Lisa watched from afar. She told herself she was happy for him, even encouraged the relationship. But the truth lived in the silence of her room at night, in the way her heart beat a little faster when Steve said her name, in the way she ached when Charlotte ran into his arms. She didn't dare name what she felt. She didn't dare want what wasn't hers. But it was there, growing, undeniable, wrapped in guilt. And Steve. He tried to make Brooke feel loved. But every kiss was a lie, every laugh forced. Because his heart was already somewhere else. Charlotte was growing fast. And Eric was growing more absent by the hour. He missed her first words, her first steps, her first giggle. But Steve was there, always. He played with her, read to her, brought her treats from his trips. Lisa tried to resist the warmth that filled her chest every time she saw them together. But it was like standing in the sun after years in the dark. She wanted to bask in it, even if it burned. Steve, meanwhile, was drowning in contradictions. Brooke wanted everything from him, and he could give her nothing. Because everything he had, everything that mattered, was tied to a woman he couldn't touch. A family that wasn't his. A love that would ruin everything. On Charlotte's first birthday, the house was decorated with pastel balloons and homemade cupcakes. Eric didn't show. He stumbled in drunk at 2 a.m., threw a $100 bill on the table and said, "Buy the hillbilly a doll." Lisa didn't cry. She just stared at the wall, as if pain had finally gone silent. The next morning, Steve invited the couple to the lake. Eric mocked her in front of friends. Lisa walked away alone. And for the first time, Steve didn't chase after Eric. He watched Lisa go, and something inside him broke forever. That night, Lisa couldn't sleep. The silence in the house was so deep that she could hear the ticking of the kitchen clock like a distant drum, not marking time but absence. Charlotte slept peacefully in her crib, her thumb still wet in her mouth, unaware of the pain floating around her. Lisa walked down the stairs slowly, barefoot and exhausted, and sat on the porch. The full moon lit up the fields, and the wind blew as if it wanted to carry her away. Her face was dry. The tears had stopped weeks ago. What remained now was an ancient weariness, A silence that spoke louder than any scream. Steve showed up without warning. He brought a blanket and 2 cups of coffee. He sat next to her without saying a word, simply offering the drink as a gesture of respect and presence. They stayed like that for long minutes. 2 tired bodies, 2 wounded souls, sharing a silence that said everything. "He hurt you in a way there's no coming back from," Steve said without looking at her. Lisa didn't respond. She just closed her eyes, letting herself feel the warmth of the coffee and the chill of the wind. "You deserve to be chosen, not tolerated." Those words, spoken in a low voice, tore something open inside her. Because for the first time, someone had named what she always knew but never dared to admit. Lisa didn't kiss him, but in that instant, she knew she had already betrayed her marriage. Not with her body, but with her heart. And that hurt even more. In the days that followed, she tried to distance herself. Skipped dinners, declined rides, sent Charlotte to meet with Steve without accompanying her. But fate does not respect fragile rules. With every attempt to run, the universe pushed them back together. A glance, an accidental touch, a forgotten note in his jacket pocket written in Charlotte's handwriting. "I love you, Uncle Steve." It was as if the whole world conspired to expose what had been hidden. Meanwhile, Eric was unraveling. Rumors began to spread that he had another woman in New York, older, powerful, and willing to finance him. Lisa pretended not to hear, but the words reached her through the mansion's corridors like arrows. One day, arriving home early, she found him kissing the woman in the family garden. Shamelessly, with no explanation, only a look of disdain. That was the moment something inside her died for good. It wasn't hate. It was liberation. Lisa didn't scream. She didn't cry. She simply went upstairs, picked up Charlotte, and slept in a guest room. And for the first time she slept in peace. Steve found out what happened through Olivia. That same night, he went to her room, found Lisa sitting on the floor with her daughter asleep in her arms, and knelt before them. "I can't promise a happy ending," he said, voice trembling. "But I can promise I'll never leave you two alone." Lisa looked at him for a long time. "I need time," she whispered. "I don't want to be anyone's mistake again." And he simply nodded. Because real love knows how to wait. Doesn't demand. Says. Deep down, Lisa knew something was about to change. Maybe not tomorrow. Maybe not next month. But the pain had turned into strength. And though she didn't yet know the name of what she felt for Steve, she finally understood what she deserved. A love that didn't have to be begged for. That didn't begin as a bet. That didn't hurt. Days passed, then weeks. Lisa avoided any unnecessary contact with Eric. The mansion felt more like a cold museum than a home, with its large, echoing halls, gleaming floors, and stiff portraits that seemed to mock her presence. Each step she took was shadowed by the whispers of those who never saw her as more than the girl from the farm who had stumbled her way into wealth. Olivia's glances became sharper, and even the staff, once sympathetic, began to treat her with professional indifference. Lisa became quieter, choosing to spend most of her time in Charlotte's room, decorating the walls with flowers and stars, as if trying to build a world where love still meant something. Charlotte was her only light. The little girl had an energy that pulled Lisa out of the darkness, if only for a few hours a day. Lisa began to tell her stories at night, stories she created herself, of brave women, clever girls, and kind-hearted kings. She no longer read fairy tales because she didn't want Charlotte to believe that love came in the shape of a man on a white horse. She wanted her daughter to know that strength often looked like silence endured, like staying when it was easier to run, like choosing to protect your heart without locking it away forever. The more she told those stories, the more she realized she wasn't just telling them for Charlotte. She was telling them for herself. One evening, Charlotte grew quiet and warm to the touch. Within hours, her body was trembling, her breathing shallow. Lisa panicked. She called for Eric, searched his study, screamed his name across the house. Nothing. Gone again. Without thinking, barefoot and wearing only a thin cardigan over her nightdress, she wrapped Charlotte in a blanket and ran. She knocked on Steve's door like a woman possessed. He opened instantly, eyes widening at the sight of Charlotte in distress. He didn't ask questions. He grabbed his jacket, picked Charlotte up, and they drove off through the foggy streets to the hospital. The emergency room lights were too bright. Lisa sat beside Charlotte's hospital bed, her hands shaking while Steve spoke with the nurse. He stayed by her side through the long night, whispering encouragement, buying hot tea from a machine that tasted like cardboard but warmed her hands. The doctor reassured them it was only a severe viral fever. Treatable, manageable. Charlotte would recover. Lisa sighed for the first time in hours. Then the doctor, almost casually, turned to Steve and asked, "Are you the father?" Steve looked at Lisa just for a second, then gently said, "Yes." And Lisa didn't correct him. Not because it was easier, but because, in her heart, it was already the truth. Back at the mansion, they were met by Olivia's fury. "You're shaming this family," she hissed like venom. Lisa, exhausted but unshaken, stood in the middle of the hallway and replied, "This family never gave me a name I wanted to carry, so I'm not shaming anyone." Olivia gasped, taken aback by the calm fire in Lisa's voice. And for the first time she had no reply. Lisa climbed the stairs with Charlotte asleep in her arms and Steve quietly behind her. And something in the silence of that climb felt like freedom. That night, Lisa slept beside her daughter, but dreamt of something else. Of laughter, of dinners under stars, of soft glances and quiet loyalty. Eric came back 3 days later. Disheveled, unshaven, reeking of whiskey and perfume. He found Lisa in the garden, where Steve and Charlotte were painting a cardboard castle. The sun cast golden light over the yard, and it looked, for a brief moment, like a family. One Eric was no longer a part of. "So this is your new life," he scoffed. Lisa didn't even look at him. "No," she said. "This is my real life. You were just the interruption." He blinked, unsure if he heard her right. She stood, brushed the grass off her dress and added, "I don't need your money. I don't need your name. I just needed to stop drowning." Steve didn't speak that day. He didn't need to. But the look in his eyes as he watched Lisa walk away from Eric said everything. Pride, admiration, and a love so deep it no longer needed to hide. That evening they had dinner under the garden lights. Just the two of them after Charlotte had gone to sleep. Lisa spoke about her childhood in a way she never had before. About the dreams she buried when she married young, the girl she once was. Steve listened, not interrupting once. At the end he simply said, "She's still there. And I love her. Lisa looked at him, not with shock, not with fear, but with something like, finally, a truth her heart had always known. And in that moment everything changed. The summer air at Willow Creek Estate was changing. Charlotte had recovered, and though Lisa remained firm in her decision to distance herself from Eric, the mansion now felt less like a cage and more like a place where she could reclaim pieces of herself. Still, the walls whispered of memories she no longer wished to hold, and the judgmental eyes of Olivia turned every meal into a courtroom. One morning, Lisa awoke to find a letter by her bedroom window. Not a text, not an email. A real letter, handwritten, sealed with blue wax and signed simply, E. At first she assumed it was from Eric, but the handwriting, soft and careful, told another story. Her heart skipped. It was Steve. And as she read, she realized he hadn't said goodbye after all. He'd only given her space to heal. Steve wrote not as a man confessing love, but as a friend who had seen her sorrow and wanted to remind her of her strength. In the letter, he told her of his resignation from Thompson Industries, of his travels to small towns and dusty roads, of nights sleeping in his truck under stars, looking for something he didn't understand until the moment he'd seen her in the garden with Charlotte. He wrote of the quiet he carried in his chest when he wasn't near her, of how every woman he'd met felt like noise after knowing her silence. Lisa read the letter 10 times before finally placing it under her pillow. The next Saturday another arrived. Then another. Every week like clockwork. Always signed, E. She never once mistook it for Eric again. Lisa began to write back. At first, her letters were hesitant, guarded, almost clipped, but week after week, they bloomed. She wrote of Charlotte's first steps, of the new recipes she tried, of how she'd begun painting again in the old guest room turned studio. She told him about the book of fairy tales she was secretly writing for her daughter, and how some nights she still cried, not for Eric, but for the girl she used to be. Steve responded with stories of wild horses, of a sleepy bakery in Vermont that sold the best lemon scones he'd ever had, of his dreams to open a school one day for children who couldn't afford one. And in every letter, there was a thread of something deeper, a connection that didn't beg to be named, but begged to be felt. Then one morning, Lisa woke up to find not one, but 2 letters. The first from Steve, like always. Charming, warm, filled with sketches he drew just for Charlotte. The second bore a different seal. Her heart sank. Eric. Inside, the letter was brief and cold. He was leaving the country for business. Indefinitely. No apology. No explanation. Just a scribbled note about transferring funds for Charlotte's care. As if that were ever the issue. Lisa folded the letter without finishing it. It no longer had power over her. She looked at Steve's sketches again. One of a woman with long hair, reading a book to a little girl under a tree. The caption below read, "Someday, somewhere, this could be our ordinary." Lisa smiled. And she wept. A few days later, Lisa decided to return to the place where everything had started. The Hale family farm. The manor was beautiful, but it had never been her home. The farm, with its scent of lavender, wild horses galloping at dusk, and the creaky porch swing her father built, was where she had known joy untainted. She packed only essentials. She left no note. Olivia would assume what she wanted. Eric, wherever he was, wouldn't notice. She and Charlotte arrived to open arms, warm soup, and the kind of peace no mansion could offer. That night, under the blanket of constellations she once wished upon as a girl, Lisa told her parents the truth. About the marriage, about Steve, about the quiet kind of love she was learning to trust. They listened. They didn't judge. They only held her hand and said, "You're home." Weeks passed in a gentler rhythm. Lisa planted flowers with her daughter in the mornings and wrote in the afternoons. Steve's letters arrived, now addressed to Miss Hale, and Lisa began signing hers as L. Then one morning, she woke to find Charlotte playing on the porch with a man who looked all too familiar. Steve. He stood up slowly, as if afraid a sudden movement might break the spell. He didn't say a word, just handed her one last letter, sealed in red wax. Inside it simply read, "It's time. If you're ready, I'm home." Lisa looked at him, as Charlotte, at the road that had broken her, and the road that had led her here. Then she stepped forward, and for the first time didn't feel like she was walking away from anything, but toward everything. Lisa didn't answer Steve with words. She simply opened the front door a little wider, her breath catching as he stepped inside the farmhouse, the scent of sunflowers and rain between them. Charlotte ran to him without hesitation, as if he'd never left, as if some part of her already knew he belonged in their story. Over the next few days, he helped repair the old barn, fixed the creaky gate, and even built a new swing beside the oak tree. The routine wasn't romantic, but it was intimate. Quiet laughter over burnt toast. Silence that didn't feel heavy. Steve never pressed. He didn't ask her to define anything, didn't touch her hand unless she reached first. But his presence was unwavering, like a lighthouse waiting for the ship to feel safe enough to dock. Late one night, after Charlotte had fallen asleep with her arms around the stuffed bunny Steve had given her, Lisa stepped out onto the porch and found him staring at the stars. She sat beside him, close enough to feel the warmth of his arm, but far enough that the choice was still hers. "Why did you come back?" she asked, voice soft. He didn't answer immediately. "Because love waits," he said finally. "Because I couldn't go on pretending that I was meant for a world where you weren't." Lisa didn't speak. She rested her head on his shoulder. It was the first time she'd allowed herself to lean without guilt, to be held without obligation. Steve didn't move, didn't speak. He just let her be. And in that stillness, something inside her healed. That week, Lisa's mother found a manuscript Lisa had tucked away in a drawer. The children's book she had been quietly writing. She read it aloud one evening after dinner, each page a story of a girl who learns the value of silence, strength, and stars. When she finished, everyone was silent. Then Charlotte clapped. Steve was already looking at Lisa, eyes wide. "You wrote that." She nodded shy. "You should publish it." Lisa hesitated. Who would want to read the story of a girl who was naive enough to believe in a love that never loved her back? Steve answered without blinking. "Everyone who still believes in the one that might." The following month brought a phone call Lisa didn't expect. Eric. He was in London alone. Olivia had moved to Dubai for a consulting job. He wasn't calling to beg or to reclaim anything, just to say he had read one of Lisa's letters, one Steve had left behind by mistake. It had shaken him. "I was never enough," he said. Not for you. Not even for myself. Lisa's voice remained calm. You didn't need to be perfect, Eric. You just needed to be honest. He hung up without a goodbye. She felt no bitterness, only a strange closure, like the sound of a door finally, softly, clicking shut. That weekend, Steve invited Lisa and Charlotte to a nearby town festival. Lanterns lit the sky like stars too full to stay hidden. Charlotte ran laughing between booths, her hand in Steve's. Lisa watched from a bench, heart brimming, the memory of sorrow slowly dissolving. As Steve returned with lemonade and cotton candy, he knelt in front of her, not with a ring but with a single question. Do you want to build something ordinary together? Lisa didn't cry. She didn't hesitate. She only whispered, yes. It wasn't the proposal she'd imagined as a girl. It was better, 'cause it was real, earned, and rooted in everything they had survived. Months passed. The book was published under the title, Letters from the Porch. It sold modestly, but the feedback was overwhelming. Women writing from corners of the world, thanking Lisa for giving voice to the kind of pain and hope that's often silenced. Steve opened a small community center with Lisa's father, teaching kids woodworking and offering free meals on Saturdays. Charlotte thrived. Laughed more. Cried less. Lisa painted again. Not for galleries, but for her own walls. Every room in the farmhouse became a mosaic of the life they'd chosen. Imperfect, unfiltered, deeply beautiful. And every Saturday, without fail, Steve still left a letter on Lisa's windowsill. Just because some things shouldn't change. Lisa stood in the fields one morning, barefoot in the dew, Charlotte giggling as she chased butterflies nearby. Steve walked up behind her, wrapped his arms around her waist, and kissed her shoulder. You're quiet, he said. Lisa closed her eyes. I was just thinking. I used to pray for the kind of love that would rescue me. She turned to him, eyes shimmering. But what I got was the kind of love that let me rescue myself. Steve smiled, brushing a strand of hair from her face. And I'll spend the rest of my life making sure you never have to rescue alone. They didn't kiss in that moment. They simply stood holding each other, while the sun rose behind them. Soft, golden, and exactly enough. Autumn arrived quietly, blanketing the town of Willow Creek in golds, deep reds, and the kind of chill that makes you want to stay close to those you love. Lisa watched the leaves fall one by one from the porch swing. A cup of coffee nestled between her palms. Charlotte wrapped in a blanket at her side. Steve had left at dawn to visit his brother in another town. But before going, he'd placed another letter on the windowsill. Lisa hadn't read it yet. She was waiting, savoring. She always did. Every Saturday morning now carried that sacred pause. The moment before a heart is moved by something as simple and as powerful as words written by someone who loves you without needing to be seen. Charlotte dozed off, and Lisa finally opened the envelope. But inside wasn't a letter. It was a small photograph, black and white, faded at the edges. It showed a little girl, maybe 4 years old, sitting atop a wooden bench, her smile wide, her arms wrapped around a rabbit plush toy. On the back, Steve had scribbled just one sentence. I knew what love looked like long before I knew it had a name. Lisa pressed the photo to her heart, eyes filling instantly. It wasn't a letter. It was a memory, truth, and perhaps a confession years in the making. she whispered into the quiet. "Come home soon," not knowing that fate was already rewriting the rest of that day. By the time the phone rang, the sun had disappeared behind a thick curtain of clouds. Lisa answered without thinking. A voice, shaken, gentle, said Steve's name. There'd been an accident. A truck on the wrong side of the road. No chance to react. No pain, they assured her. Just light. Just quiet. The world seemed to stop breathing. Lisa held the phone for minutes after the call ended, as if clinging to the voice on the other end could reverse time. She didn't cry immediately. She just stood, ill, until Charlotte woke and asked where Steve was. Lisa couldn't answer. Her knees gave out before her voice did. The funeral was held on a Tuesday. Rained. People spoke of Steve's kindness, of how he never walked into a room without making someone feel seen. But Lisa stayed silent. She stood at the edge of the crowd, holding Charlotte's hand, watching the casket descend like the last page of a story that had more to say. That night she went to the porch alone. She didn't expect another letter, but there it was, wet from the rain, edges curled. Inside, one final note. If you're reading this, it means I didn't get to say goodbye, but I hope you never do either, because goodbye feels too final for something that lives forever in us. Lisa didn't sleep that night. She sat beside Charlotte's bed and told her stories of a man who loved quietly but fiercely, who built swings and read bedtime tales and left letters like breadcrumbs in a forest of healing. The next morning, Lisa opened her manuscript again. She wrote for hours, tears falling between sentences, memories inked into every page. When the book was finally done, she titled it The Last Letter. It became a sensation, not because it was perfectly written, but because it told the truth of a love that came softly, of a goodbye that never really ended, of a man who lived in the small things and died in the arms of the one thing that never failed him: hope. Years passed. Charlotte grew into a young woman, resilient and radiant. The farmhouse remained, filled with laughter and the quiet hum of memories. Lisa never remarried. Not because her heart had closed, but because it had been filled once, and fully. Every Saturday, she still placed a letter on the windowsill. For Steve. For herself. For the kind of love that doesn't ask to be loud, just loyal. She often sat on the porch, watching the wind play with the curtains, and whispered, "Thank you for choosing me, when I couldn't even choose myself." On the anniversary of Steve's passing, Charlotte left a note of her own beside her mother's. It read, "He wasn't my father by blood, but he taught me how to love, how to dream, and how to stay." Lisa read it with trembling hands, kissed her daughter's forehead, and looked up at the sky. Cloudless, blue, infinite. "You were never gone," she said. "You just became everything around me." And just then, a breeze swept through the porch, lifting the corner of the last letter. Lisa smiled through her tears, because some endings aren't endings at all. They're beginnings wearing softer clothes.